Have you seen an organization begging its members to stay? Not just begging, ECOWAS is changing its policies. But instead of wondering why the regret kicked in, we should question how far the organizations controlled by the West go to manipulate Africa. Because once an exploiter, always an exploiter.
You saw that the president of Nigeria and the president of Ivory Coast went to Paris, and we suspect that France is manipulating ECOWAS.
When ECOWAS failed to work and started using nations for Western gains, 3 nations decided to leave. But soon it learned the lesson. And now it is ready to do everything to convince them to stay. But the concerning part is, it has only decided to take off the sanctions from one nation, Niger. The 3 nations left ECOWAS because of the sanctions imposed. But what made ECOWAS impose sanctions? It was the military leaders controlling these nations after the coup. And surprisingly, now ECOWAS is ready to lift the sanctions on Niger. Is the Niger leader not a problem now? Or is ECOWAS planning something big? Let's find out. In West Africa, the Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS has decided to lift most sanctions imposed on Niger. This announcement unfolds against recent regional political turbulence, signifying a critical juncture for ECOWAS and the affected member states. The ramifications of this diplomatic move extend beyond immediate implications for Niger, shaping the discourse on regional stability and the efficacy of sanctions as a tool for political change. To understand the significance of ECOWAS' decision to lift sanctions on Niger, it is crucial to delve deeper into the historical and political intricacies surrounding the regional bloc. Established nearly 5 decades ago, ECOWAS used to help foster cooperation and integration among West African nations. Its initial objectives aimed at economic collaboration and promoting democratic governance, contributing to the region's stability. However, recent events have thrust ECOWAS into uncharted territory, challenging its foundational principles. The withdrawal of 3 member states, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, due to military coups represents a seismic shift in the organization's dynamics. The decision to impose sanctions on these nations was a direct response to political instability following the ousting of Niger's President Bazoum in a military coup. These measures, including trade suspensions and sanctions, were intended to pressure the military-led governments to reinstate democratic order and engage in dialogue with ECOWAS. Contrary to the intended impact, the sanctions seemed to encourage the junta in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Rather than succumbing to international pressure, these nations collectively withdrew from ECOWAS and allied. This move challenged the authority of ECOWAS, but also signaled a potential fracture within the regional bloc. In response to the evolving situation, ECOWAS has recently decided to lift most sanctions on Niger, citing humanitarian concerns as the driving force behind this decision. The lifting encompasses a range of measures, from removing no-fly zones and border closures to easing restrictions on economic and financial institutions. However, the nature of this decision is questionable, as some targeted and political sanctions remain in place for Niger. This selective approach highlights the complexity of the diplomatic strategy and raises questions about ECOWAS intentions. The decision to ease sanctions has triggered skepticism among analysts who question its effectiveness in influencing the military juntas in these countries. ECOWAS's move is perceived as an attempt to initiate dialogue with the military-led governments and prevent further regional fragmentation. This diplomatic trick, viewed as a gesture of appeasement, forms part of a broader effort by ECOWAS to address the ongoing political crises and promote stability in West Africa. But why were the sanctions taken off from Niger? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. ECOWAS also has put sanctions on the other 2 nations. Why didn't they take sanctions off of them? This single ECOWAS is up to something. The recent decision by ECOWAS to lift sanctions on Niger while maintaining punitive measures on other member states has raised eyebrows and generated speculation about the regional bloc's underlying motives and strategic objectives. The complexity of this diplomatic action demands careful consideration, as it hints at some secrets within ECOWAS that go beyond the surface-level narrative of humanitarian concerns. The lifting of sanctions on Niger, as announced by ECOWAS Commission President Omar Ulterior, was framed as a response to humanitarian concerns arising from the political turmoil in the region. However, the selective nature of this decision, with no-fly zones and border closures being lifted with immediate effect for Niger, prompts a closer look at the motivations guiding ECOWAS's actions. Why was a similar condition not set for other member states facing sanctions? ECOWAS's decision not to lift sanctions on Mali and Burkina Faso, both grappling with recent military coups and part of the alliance of Sahel states, raises suspicions about a potential ulterior motive or strategic calculus. The regional bloc's approach seems deliberate and calculated, suggesting that the lifting of sanctions on Niger might be a carefully calibrated move, rather than a blanket response to humanitarian concerns. The geopolitical landscape within West Africa is evolving, marked by the emergence of the Alliance of Sahel states and the threat of 3 key member states permanently withdrawing from ECOWAS. The organization's differential treatment of member states prompts questions about its broader strategy and goals. Is ECOWAS using sanctions selectively to influence political outcomes within specific member states? Moreover, ECOWAS' call for Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso to engage in technical discussions without fully restoring their membership status makes things more complex. And what reason ECOWAS gave to lift sanctions from Niger? The recent decision by the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, to lift sanctions imposed on Niger highlights a fine diplomatic strategy shaped by humanitarian concerns and a broader regional agenda. As highlighted in ECOWAS's official statements and media reports, the move to ease sanctions primarily rests on the humanitarian imperative of alleviating the suffering caused by the restrictions, particularly in Niger. While ostensibly driven by compassion, this diplomatic action is implanted in a larger context of ongoing regional political crises. The imposition of sanctions by ECOWAS on these nations, including measures such as a no-fly zone and border closures, was a response to the military coup that disrupted democratic governance and stability. Now, with the lifting of sanctions, ECOWAS aims to pave the way for constructive dialogue with the military-led governments in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. But why are military leaders not a problem? What led to this change? A pivotal aspect of ECOWAS's strategy is the perception of lifting sanctions as a gesture of appeasement. The organization seeks to persuade these nations, grappling with internal political challenges, to reconsider their decision to withdraw from the bloc, by engaging in technical discussions without immediately reinstating full membership status. ECOWAS is trying to encourage participation while addressing the concerns that led to the withdrawal announcement. Nevertheless, skepticism abounds among experts regarding the potential impact of these diplomatic gestures on the junta-led states. The central question revolves around whether the easing of sanctions will prompt substantial changes in the positions or decisions of these governments. But what made ECOWAS change its decisions? How did the transformation from putting sanctions on to lifting sanctions happen? This strategic decision follows a summit held in Abuja, Nigeria, where ECOWAS chairman and Nigerian President Bola Tinubu presided over discussions that emphasized a recalibration of the regional approach. Tinubu's focus on reassessing the approach to constitutional order in the withdrawn countries indicates a shift in diplomatic dynamics that demands closer attention. The ECOWAS summit, convened on December 10, 2023, emerged as a significant event amid an organizational crisis triggered by military coups and the subsequent suspension of member states. The primary objective of the summit was to address the complex situation in Niger, where a military coup had ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, leading to severe economic and financial sanctions on the country. The summit saw the participation of heads of state from the 15 ECOWAS member countries, excluding Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger nations governed by military leaders following the 2020 coups. These countries were notably absent, highlighting the geopolitical fault lines within the organization. The Abuja Summit gained added significance as it aimed to address the departure of 3 member states, a constitutional crisis in a 4th, and the repercussions of Niger's withdrawal on regional efforts to combat armed groups. Deliberations also extended to discussions on the military drone attack that claimed the lives of over 80 civilians in northern Kaduna in December. Crucial questions arise from this dynamic summit. Can diplomatic dialogue effectively tackle the challenges of recent coups, or does the region require a more assertive approach to ensure lasting stability? The Abuja Summit, held against the backdrop of heightened geopolitical challenges within the ECOWAS region, was a test of the resilience and adaptability of the regional bloc. While the summit focused on the importance of 3 pivotal nations, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, some experts assert that the public discussions may have been a mere facade, concealing more negotiations occurring behind closed doors. This narrative raises questions about the extent of external influence, particularly from Western powers, in shaping ECOWAS's decisions, including the recent move to lift sanctions. The public discourse surrounding the significance of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso at the summit may have been a strategic showcase for global audiences. Experts argue that ECOWAS, to some extent, is under the influence of Western powers, and decisions, such as the selective lifting of sanctions, might be reflective of broader geopolitical agendas. The notion that ECOWAS operates under a plan controlled by Western entities introduces complexity to the regional dynamics. While the organization is meant to be a collaborative effort among West African nations, the suggestion of external control raises questions about the autonomy and sovereignty of the regional bloc. If Western powers indeed have a plan, what are the motivations behind such influence, and how does it align with the interests of the member states? The decision to lift sanctions, a move framed as a response to humanitarian concerns, now takes on a different hue. If there is external control over ECOWAS, as some experts suggested, lifting sanctions becomes a regional decision and a manifestation of broader geopolitical strategies. Understanding the intricacies of these behind-the-scenes discussions becomes paramount for grasping the true dynamics shaping the future of West Africa. You are wrong if you think the sanctions will be taken off easily. ECOWAS has to show that it didn't change its policies, while it has. So, to show the world that ECOWAS still holds the old beliefs, it has put some conditions on the nations if they want sanctions to be lifted. The decision to lift sanctions on Niger by ECOWAS is not a unilateral action, but one that comes with specific conditions. ECOWAS has explicitly stipulated the immediate release of President Mohamed Bazoum, who was ousted in a military coup last July. The ongoing detention of Bazoum in the presidential palace in Niamey is the focal point in the diplomatic negotiations. The implications of this conditionality extend to ECOWAS's role as a mediator and influencer in regional affairs. The conditional nature of the sanction lift is meant to highlight ECOWAS's commitment to leveraging its influence to promote specific outcomes in line with democratic principles and stability. It also reflects the organization's recognition of individual leaders' pivotal role in shaping member states' political landscape. The connections between ECOWAS and the three nations, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, governed by military leaders, reveal a complex interplay of regional dynamics, sovereignty, and external influence. Following military coups, the decision to impose sanctions on these nations triggered a chain of events, including their withdrawal from ECOWAS. The subsequent move to selectively lift sanctions on specific conditions adds a layer of ambiguity to the regional landscape, fueling suspicions about ECOWAS's intentions. Critics argue that ECOWAS's actions, particularly the imposition of terms for lifting sanctions, indicate a desire to exert influence and control over the internal affairs of these nations led by military regimes. The insistence on conditions, such as the release of President Mohamed Bazoum in Niger, raises questions about the regional bloc's approach to engaging with governments that diverge from the democratic norm. The withdrawal of the three nations from ECOWAS was partly a response to unwarranted interference in their internal affairs. The imposition of sanctions served as a tool to pressure these military-led governments to restore democratic order. However, the subsequent decision to lift sanctions, albeit with conditions, raises concerns about the fine line between promoting democratic values and infringing on the sovereignty of member states. The conditions set by ECOWAS for lifting sanctions, particularly the demand for the release of President Bazoum, are interpreted as an attempt to shape the internal dynamics of these nations. While seemingly rooted in humanitarian concerns, this approach is viewed through a lens of geopolitics, where ECOWAS seeks to assert its influence over governments perceived as straying from democratic principles. But was there something that particularly made ECOWAS return? Has anything encouraged ECOWAS? Yes, it was envy. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel states, composed of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and their subsequent declaration of a permanent withdrawal from ECOWAS was also motivated by a unified regional organization, Sahel. What factors prompted these three nations to develop this alliance, effectively severing ties with ECOWAS? The emergence of this alternative bloc suggests a divergence in priorities, perhaps influenced by shared challenges, geopolitical considerations, or dissatisfaction with ECOWAS's approach to addressing regional crises. The implications of the alliance's actions on regional stability cannot be overstated. As Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger band together, The potential ripple effects on existing regional dynamics and cooperative frameworks demand careful consideration. Does the formation of the alliance signify a broader trend of nations prioritizing sub-regional alliances over broader regional affiliations? ECOWAS envy them as they grow together. ECOWAS, in response to this fracture, extends an invitation for the three nations to engage in technical discussions. What impact will this invitation have? The decision to ease sanctions on Niger, while ostensibly a diplomatic move, carries profound economic implications that echo across the West African region. Beyond the complexities of diplomacy, this gesture of appeasement is aimed at influencing Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso to remain within the regional bloc. The looming exit of these nations, coupled with the establishment of the Alliance of Sahel states, injects uncertainty into regional integration efforts and threatens to disrupt the substantial trade and services flows, estimated at nearly $150 billion annually. The economic implications of this delicate diplomatic action prompt examining the region's economic resilience and the measures in place to mitigate potential fallout. How robust is ECOWAS in the face of disentanglement, and what strategies are being devised to safeguard against economic shocks? The impending disentanglement of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso from ECOWAS poses a substantial threat to the economic stability of West Africa. As these nations align themselves in the alliance of Sahel states, the specter of economic disentanglement dominates, potentially unleashing far-reaching consequences for the region's overall stability and developmental course. The planned exit of these key member states and alignment in a new geopolitical alliance signifies a potential disruption to the economic fabric carefully woven through regional integration efforts. The fact that ECOWAS is extending an invitation for the three nations to return speaks volumes about the significance of their continued membership. The economic repercussions of their exit are a cause for concern, prompting ECOWAS to strive for retention within the regional bloc. This highlights the intricate web of economic interdependence that binds West African nations and highlights the perceived value of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso within the ECOWAS community. ECOWAS's invitation for these nations to return is not merely a diplomatic action, but a pragmatic recognition of the economic difficulties at stake. The regional bloc, aware of the potential disruptions and shocks, is signaling a willingness to navigate the challenges together, emphasizing the importance of collective economic resilience. So all this might be a trick to get the three nations back so the economy keeps moving, or it is a trick planned by external pressure to take control of Africa's most powerful nations again. Will the three nations make a comeback? Given the conditions set by ECOWAS for lifting sanctions on the three nations, it appears unlikely that they would readily rejoin the regional bloc. The conditions, particularly the immediate release of President Mohamed Bazoum in Niger, make diplomatic negotiations difficult. To foster genuine re-engagement, ECOWAS needs to demonstrate sincerity in its intentions and a commitment to addressing the concerns that led to the withdrawal of these nations. The sincerity of ECOWAS becomes paramount in rebuilding trust and fostering a conducive environment for the return of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Merely imposing conditions without addressing the root causes of the rift may perpetuate the existing challenges and hinder the potential for diplomatic resolution. ECOWAS must engage in transparent and open dialogue, acknowledging the grievances of the three nations and working collaboratively to find mutually acceptable solutions. To achieve meaningful reconciliation, ECOWAS should go beyond a conditional approach and consider broader diplomatic strategies, prioritizing inclusivity, respect for national sovereignty, and a genuine commitment to fostering regional stability. Demonstrating a sincere willingness to address the concerns of the member states will be crucial in facilitating their return and ensuring the long-term success of the regional bloc. Do you think the three nations will return to the conditions given by ECOWAS? Why does ECOWAS not welcome them with no conditions? Let us know in the comments section if you think this step is to get the three nations back because of their economic importance or to control them. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.